In October 2014, Ambassador Matthew T. Harrington arrived in Lesotho to begin his 3-year tour as the United States Ambassador to the Kingdom of Lesotho. As he prepares to return to Washington, D.C. for other Department of State assignments, we caught up with him to find out what his most memorable moments were in the Mountain Kingdom, both professionally and personally. This were his responses.
Without doubt, we'll miss, I think, the physical beauty, the welcome that I've gotten from so many Basotho. So I will miss the people and I will miss the scenery very much. Well, this is the 8th country in Africa I've lived in. I've spent about 20 years of my life in Africa. I first went as a 1-year-old to Tanzania, where my parents were teachers at a Tanzanian secondary school on Lake Victoria. But I caught the Africa bug from my parents, and I've clearly never recovered from it. And have spent so much of my life, both before I joined the State Department and since joining the State Department, in Africa. And so when I got the opportunity to come to Lesotho, it was really like coming home for me. I felt very welcome. I felt very much a part of the culture here. I remember loving, we had, they called it Nshima. It was the same as Papa here. And I had Nshima at least once a week for 3 years. And so when I came here, I was just delighted that that was a part of the diet. And I think I have somebody who cooks meals for me, and I think she was surprised when I asked that she cooked that. It took her a little bit by surprise. I was a Peace Corps volunteer myself in Mauritania many moons ago. I taught English in a secondary school in the northern part of the country. That experience probably had more of an impact on my life in many ways than many of my later experiences in life. And I've been a big fan of Peace Corps ever since. Very proud of the role that Peace Corps has played in Lesotho. This is the 50th anniversary of Peace Corps' presence in Lesotho. Uninterrupted for 50 years, volunteers have been working across the country, doing work in the health sector. They work as teachers. And I've had so many conversations with Basotho, both in government and outside government, about the positive experience they've had about the impact of a Peace Corps volunteer on their life. And volunteers who served in Lesotho continue after they leave to have a connection to Lesotho. They stay involved, they raise money, they form organizations to support different projects in Lesotho. We did one trip to Tabaseka in the mountains. We spent several days traveling around the district. So many good memories from that trip, but I remember one, we went to Bokong Nature Reserve. One of the Mandela Washington Fellows is the park manager there. And it was so neat to arrive and see the excitement she had about the work that she did and the niche that she played in the eco and the conservation arena. The reason it exists is because that's the breeding ground for the bearded vulture. And we walked for about 30 minutes to get to the point where we set up a telescope and looked across the canyon, and we were able to see a bearded vulture nesting, and that was just an incredible experience, both because, you know, I was with my son. It was a beautiful location. We got to see one incredibly amazing thing that one of the Mandela Washington Fellows is doing. Observers of Africa have talked for some time now about the youth bulge. And a large percentage of the population in Africa, and that includes Lesotho, of course, is below the age of 30. So we as a government have worked to engage young people and have made that an emphasis in our exchange programs and other programs we have on the ground here. So we have a number of exchange programs. More than 600 Basotho have studied in the U.S. on U.S. government-sponsored programs over the years. Many more have gone at their own expense. And so there are a lot of people here now who have gone on those kinds of programs. One of the exchange programs, which specifically targets young people, and that's the Young African Leaders Initiative. And that really identifies the cream of the crop of young Basotho in the areas of government, the private sector, civil society. And they go to the U.S. for 6 weeks of training based at a U.S. university. And they get academic training, leadership training, mentorship, and they then come back to Lesotho. And I got to tell you, they are dynamic young people. I love meeting with them. On the tough days in Lesotho, when there's a challenge related to the political situation or the security situation, you meet these young people and they give you incredible optimism. For the first time in 3 years I have a sense of optimism about some of the challenges being addressed. I arrived in October, 2 months after the events of August of 2014, in which the Prime Minister at the time, Prime Minister Tabani, fled into South Africa. That was not Lesotho's brightest moment, I think. There have been a lot of challenges related to good governance in the security sector since. I want to praise the new government that came in June for moving to address some very difficult questions, but very happy to see the new government moving to address the culture of impunity that's been a challenge in the military in particular. The government has said the right things, but they're also taking concrete steps, I think, to hold those accused of wrongdoing accountable. And I think that's the first step toward a real reform of the security sector, which I see as the most pressing of a range of reform priorities. That's one of the things I'm proudest of. I'm very proud of our PEPFAR team. PEPFAR has been here since 2007, and we were doing very important work through PEPFAR. But Lesotho was not making the progress that I think many people would hope for, and I sense a real frustration in my Senate confirmation hearing and from the head of our PEPFAR program in the U.S. before I came that we had been engaged in Lesotho with significant resources and technical assistance for a long time, but Lesotho just wasn't making the progress. It was not a good news story when it came to HIV/AIDS. That has been transformed in 3 years, and that is a result not only of a phenomenal PEPFAR team, but of a real partnership that we've had with government, with civil society and the private sector. Lesotho is making real strides. 2.5 years ago, only 35% of HIV-positive Lesotho were on treatment. Now we're well in excess of 70% of the population. Lesotho is one of the only countries in the world now on the verge of achieving epidemic control. The friendship between Basotho and Americans has been strong for a long time. We've done a lot of important things together through thick and thin, through difficult times, but we will continue to be on your side. We will continue to be beside you in the challenges that you face. And so I've been struck by the strength of that partnership, and that partnership will continue. So many things. One, how beautiful a country it is. One of the most beautiful countries I've ever spent time in. It will be hard to say goodbye to that. On a policy side, you hear regular debates in the U.S. about the impact of foreign assistance. The resources that we are investing in Lesotho are making a huge difference, and I think Americans will be proud of that investment.
Sir, we have one last question, and that's a very important one. Do you know how to properly wear a Basotho blanket?
I have an idea, but I'm not sure that I would put it on completely appropriately if left to my own devices.
Have you told us everything you'll miss about Lesotho, Mr. Ambassador?
I will miss the win.
Okay.